Hello and welcome back to Leader Up, a podcast of Army Management Staff College. Leader Up is a professional leadership conversation where we discuss a broad range of leadership and leader development topics with an emphasis on the Army civilian profession. I'm your host, David Howie. Seeing and accurately assessing the changing topography of the global security environment is a challenge that has existed for several thousand years. Warfare of the future will be markedly different from warfare of the present, and even vastly more different from warfare of the past. America's enemies around the world are fighting a different type of warfare that many American citizens and service members do not recognize or understand. In today's episode of Leader Up, we're joined by Mr. Steve Banach, the director of Army Management Staff College, who's going to talk about the challenges America faces today. And he will do this by discussing his view of grand strategy in the context of global entanglement and multi-reality warfare. He will also discuss strategic maneuver and how it has evolved over the past 30 years and how adversaries to the United States are using new indirect warfighting capabilities to fundamentally weaken our country, change our very way of life, and eliminate the ability of the U.S. military to win another war. So, Mr. Banach, thank you for being with us today on Leader Up.
Hey, thank you, Dave. It's a real honor to be here, and thank you for all that you do with these podcasts.
Okay, thank you, sir. We appreciate your time. Let's start with something we talked about in the opening, this notion of grand strategy. What is grand strategy, and why is it important to the U.S. Army in terms of winning wars?
In its simplest form, grand strategy is a long-term schema that's pursued at the highest levels by a nation to further its interests. It's a whole of nation approach to conducting warfare, and there's really kind of two key things I would say that we're trying to achieve. Number one is leverage. We're trying to create leverage so that we can do what we want to do when we want to do it. And the second piece, in particular, within the context of the current global security milieu, is creating the most effective learning system possible. Right, the learning system in the context of a grand strategy is the weapon system. When you think about cyber, social media, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the gamut of new capabilities that we've seen really explode over the last 15 years. So the global entanglement and the multi-reality warfare construct as a grand strategy is being artfully orchestrated by a myriad of adversaries to the United States of America. And they are pursuing an indirect strategic maneuver rubric that most of us can't see on a daily basis. It's like opaque warfare. So we have to be very mindful of not just things seen, but things that are unseen. So, by way of, historical review, containment was our last grand strategy. It was authored by George Kennan, around the 1946-1947 timeframe to contain communism, right? So it was our last effective strategy. One could make an argument that the global war on terror was grafted into the containment strategy as a kind of a 2.0 after 9/11. But the main point is that the United States lacks a current and coherent whole-of-nation strategy for a time such as this that is able to mobilize the national industrial base to win and win wars and conduct the strategic maneuver that's required to do so. So, when we look at global entanglement and multi-reality warfare from a grand strategy standpoint, our adversaries are using it today. It has enveloped our Army. It has enveloped the Department of Defense, and it's compromised our national industrial base, which is how the United States wins war. We win wars, and the last time we won a war was in World War II, and we had a homogeneous national industrial base that we drew all our power for. So, of note, the U.S. tech companies that reside in China, as an example, are not the same U.S. tech companies which reside in the mainland United States. And never in the history of our country, certainly not in my lifetime, has our national industrial base been more compromised through foreign entanglement to the extent that we see today. And when I talk about entanglement, the phenomena that I'm addressing is entanglement in the full range of science, technology, engineering, academia, and the like. And so it's broad, it's pervasive, it's nonstop. So this is, in the context of warfare, what's emerged is a new strategic system that is larger than multi-domain operations concepts by orders of magnitude. And I just want to make an inject here. What I'm saying is not binary. We need multi-domain operations as an operational theater level construct. We needed air-land battle as an operational theater construct. We needed unified land operations as an operational theater construct to win campaigns, battles, and engagements. Okay, so it's not a binary discussion. All right, what I'm highlighting here is that multi-domain operations is a smaller system that has been enveloped by this new strategic warfighting system that our adversaries have created. And from a systems theory standpoint, it's very, very difficult or impossible for a smaller subordinate system to fight and beat the larger system. I mean, it's just theoretically untenable. So, we've seen air-land battle. We've seen the effects that it had in Desert Shield and Desert Storm and how powerful it was. But we've also seen, going all the way back, I mentioned, World War II, back to, the theater war in Korea, the theater war in Vietnam, and we're at war for 19 years and running now. What I see as the major capability gap is the lack of a grand strategy that incorporates a new strategic maneuver construct for the United States of America to fight and win the nation's wars. So, to be able to win the nation's wars, we've got to be able to mobilize the national industrial base under a new grand strategy. And, our combat power has always historically come from our national industrial base. We won World War II because we had a bigger and better warfighting machine than Germany and Japan. And as we go through this podcast, I'm going to introduce, new mental models and things, and I'm going to talk, specifically about virtual battle space, and it's a very, very real thing. Virtual battle space has a structure, a set of capabilities, a flow of information and data that comes out in time and timing that none of us can control. I mean, it's really, anarchy in its truest form. But virtual battle space is a very real thing, and we've got to be able to embrace new mental models and conceptualize battle space in a different way, or we'll never win. The French in 1919 couldn't conceptualize blitzkrieg, but they were totally crushed by it. The concept, the new mental model that the Germans created and deployed against the French in 1940. So our ability to embrace new mental models and new thinking is very, very important. So we've got to be able to reimagine battle space as something that I describe as being in our homes, in our offices, and at all points in between. And it's a never-ending war. Virtual battle space never shuts down, as you see occasionally in physical battle space, where it's more episodic, type fighting. And the other point I'd make here, while I'm talking about this, is that most of the adversaries of the United States do not wear uniforms. I mean, they don't look like traditional combatants, and that's hard for people to understand and to rationalize, because we view, in a historical sense, we view soldiers as combatants, and they go off and fight wars in a faraway place, etc. That's all changed. We're all of us are being assaulted every single day, and we don't know it. It's just coming in a different way that I'll describe here as we go through here. Hey, Dave, my final thought on this particular question on grand strategy, it relates to our adversary. So what happens when the primary adversaries to the United States of America uses large-scale combat operations and direct kinetic maneuver on traditional physical battlefields as the centerpiece for their strategic deception strategy against the U.S. military. All the while they're conducting nonstop indirect strategic maneuver in global virtual battle space at pennies on the dollars to defeat the United States without ever firing a shot. And that is exactly what's happening today, Dave.
And so having said all of that, I'd like to take you back in the past and get your reaction to this quote. And the quote is from Sun Tzu, the Chinese military philosopher. And the quote is, "The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting." And so I just want to get your reaction to that and then ask you, how is a quote from roughly 2,500 years ago during the Eastern Zhou dynasty relevant to this discussion of modern warfare?
The quote's the centerpiece of our adversary's grand strategy, in particular China, but others as well. I mean, the whole goal here is to win wars without ever firing a shot. I mean, that's the objective of every great commander. The world has experienced exponential change over the last 30 years, and you got to ask yourself the question: have we changed exponentially over the last 30 years to keep pace with the adversaries in the global security milieu that we operate in? Clausewitz, one of the great captains of military history, he talked to us very, very plainly about the first and supreme, most far-reaching act of judgment that a statesman or commander, has to make is to establish by test the kind of war on which they are embarking. So, what type of war are we fighting today? It's not Desert Shield and Desert Storm. All right, that is a requirement. It's fundamental in great power competition in physical battle space, but there's also a great power competition that is far more pervasive in virtual battle space that we don't have the capabilities for. When we think about where we're at today, in our Army and look back in history, we had a citizen soldier Army in 1775 when, the people that fought on Concord and Lexington. And then that changed, to a conscript army that we kept until it was 1973, until that didn't work in the Vietnam era. And then we embraced the, all volunteer force, which is what we have today. And I would argue, all right, that we need a fourth evolution of our Army. We need an Army that has a different form, a different set of functions, and a different logic, set of capabilities to fight and win the nation's wars. And the test for that is, are we winning wars? And how long are we going to go into this? I mean, we're 19 years into the current war, and I would actually make that plural, wars, because we're fighting terrorism, physical terrorism, predominantly conducted by civilians in physical battle space. But there's virtual terrorism going on in the virtual battle space that I talked about early on. So there's a reframing that needs to occur, and to maintain a professional Army, we have to approach it from an educational standpoint. First of all, how has the theory of war evolved and changed? All right, so we've got to teach people how to think and not what to think. We've got to educate for uncertainty, to deal with complex adaptive problem solving. We've got to continue to train people for certainty and to deal with technical problems. But fundamentally, the problem typology for our Army and our nation has shifted from something technical problem solving that we're very familiar with. We have familiar patterns of solutions that we could easily apply to these things, from processes to this complex adaptive problem norm that we don't have familiar patterns for, that requires different mental models driven by high-end educational programs to be able to do that. So when we look at leading change, and we've got to approach it from a cognitive standpoint, reconcile what's going on in virtual battle space and physical battle space in order to do what Singay talks about in his fifth discipline: maintain personal mastery. As an Army, our job is to fight and win the nation's wars. We need to do that through the creation of new mental models, restructure our learning and how we're learning. Learning is the coin of the realm. Whoever has the best learning system as a weapon system can make the most effective decisions and win. And we have to think in terms of systems, a systems theory to create a shared vision that can allow us to win the nation's war. So there's a number of things that we've got in front of us. Clausewitz talked about winning the ideal war, the tank war today in modern terms, and the real war, the political war that generals and statesmen are confronted with. But I would tell you that we got to win the idea war. We need to embrace new concepts like anti-fragility, figure out how our Army can be more anti-fragile. If we don't develop a synthetic soldier immunity capability where we have multiple levels of synthetic immunity built into a soldier's warfighting capability, the survivability of our soldiers is going to be very, very low on the next battlefield. And that's going to also lead us to autonomous leadership construct, where soldiers are going to be able, by machine learning devices that are going to help them learn and make decisions in a matter of seconds. And lastly on this subject is this reconciliation of asymmetric ethics. What are the limits of tolerance and zones of acceptability in virtual battle space? Are we going to create and frame a name that determines action that we take either in virtual space or in physical battle space against an adversary who perpetrated something against us? So, there's a lot there, but at the end of the day, what I'm offering here is a fundamental reframe of our conceptualization of how it is we're thinking about warfare and how our adversaries are thinking about warfare. And again, I'm basing all of this, most of it, on what our adversaries are doing to us.
And that kind of leads me into the next topic I wanted to ask you about. And it's a phrase that I've heard you use. It's problem framing. Armies win wars because they're able to accurately frame the problems that they face and also to frame their opportunities. So what is problem framing, and how has it been relevant over, let's say, the past 100 years of warfare?
Problem theory goes hand in hand with learning theory, right? And our ability to frame systems of problems and systems of opportunity that are dynamic and constantly changing is very, very important. Heretofore, the primary problem typology construct we were dealing with are technical problem situations, right? Destroying, the tank army, the access aerial denial stuff, the technical solutions like hypersonic weapons and the like. Okay, well, all of that has changed. The Army hasn't recognized this change. The society, for that matter, hasn't changed because we're still embracing many industrial age systems, processes that are collapsing under the weight of the complexity that we're experiencing, over the last 30 years. And I'll talk about, if I get a chance here, the collapsing industrial age archetypes that I see that are being attributed. But so when we talk about problem framing, we've got, it's not the problem. All right. It is when you're talking about a technical problem, but that's not the world we live in anymore. So when we talk about problem framing, we're talking about framing complex adaptive systems of problems. Okay. And Ron Heifetz talks about this in his book, Leadership Without Easy Answers. He talks about technical problems that I just mentioned. He talks about technical adaptive problems, problems that have a technical component and a biological human adaptive piece to it. And then the third and most difficult piece is this notion of complex adaptive problems, that are characterized by variety in the system that produces emergent activity that by and large is unpredictable. And then, lastly, just from a human behavior standpoint, oftentimes, we focus on tactical problem symptoms, and I'll use an iceberg metaphor. When you see kind of what this what is perceived as a problem, this incident above the waterline, it's just a representation of a deeper root problem that we're not seeing because we're not using the right mental model, the ability to create space and ask questions to get to the root system of problems, the tensions in the system, the propensity of the system of power that's driving all this stuff. It takes a design framework, iterative learning, and probing by way of questions to be able to address that.
And so talking about problem framing, can you discuss or identify some historical examples of when armies and countries, nations have framed wars or seen wars incorrectly, and what were the consequences of those examples?
I already talked about the French and the Germans, but I'll just expand on that. So from 1919 to 1939, in that interwar period, the French approach to warfare was that they spent more money than all the Allies combined. They built the Maginot Line and built their entire global schema on firepower, right? All right, and they essentially prepared for the last war that we won, World War I. The Germans, conversely, in 1919 and 1939, developed a completely different approach that we all know about. It's blitzkrieg. It's a new form of warfare. If they had a better strategic, national industrial base and better, war machine, we may all be speaking a different language today. But so the French prepared for war in one way. The Germans, which is what I'm advocating, reframed their conceptualization for what war ought to be and what war could be, and they produced blitzkrieg. Similarly, in 2003, the U.S. approach and I was in that war. I was in the 1990-91 war, and I saw them both, which is why I'm using it as an example. Our war in 2003 and the Gulf War in 2003 was so familiar with what we did in 1991 when we invaded Iraq, back then. Okay, it was basically fighting the last war we won. And what did our adversary do to us in 2003? The Iraqi people approach was, now we're not going to go toe-to-toe with them. We're going to introduce what we call counterinsurgency operations. And we saw suicide bombers and a whole range of things that didn't fit in the large-scale combat operations rubric. Okay, and then took us about 3 years. We had the reframe in 2006 and 2007 under General Petraeus' leadership. We reframed the problem situation, introduced coin, and we're able to fight our way out of that war to where it is today. And I will tell you, from a 2020 standpoint, our U.S. approach to war, large-scale combat operations, is very much akin to what we're doing in 2003. We've re-embraced electronic warfare and signals intelligence that I used as a captain back in 1991 out in front of the 24th Division TAC up on the Iraqi border. So reinventing new capabilities, that's all good, and we're grafting cyber into it. But there's from a threat perspective, and what the threat will do to us, I predict, is they are developing right now an indirect virtual warfare approach that will include cyber, social media, be driven by artificial intelligence and machine learning, employ robotics, electronic warfare, signals intelligence, mass employment of nanotechnologies and space operations, that will ensure, number one, that they have assured connectivity, persistent surveillance, and ubiquitous exploitation capabilities over every aspect of not only our armies, but our country to achieve, in time, virtual colonization and social control. What we're going to experience in the next war will not look anything like large-scale combat operations. The goal, going back to the Sun Tzu quote, is to win the war without ever fighting the war. So there's multiple examples of what countries going into war expected to do and what was thrust upon them.
And let's talk about another topic that I've heard you address, and it's something called great power competition. And I'd like to hear your ideas about great power competition and quote unquote the American way of war. What are the implications for the United States Army and the United States regarding great power competition as it exists today?
So, and again, not a binary subject, right? So there is a tremendous great power competition in physical battle space, and as I alluded to earlier, I think it's the centerpiece for the multiple adversaries that we have. As a centerpiece for their grand strategy. The other piece of great power competition that we're not talking about is the great power competition in virtual battle space that it utilizes all the capabilities I just mentioned a second ago, from cyber, through nano technologies in space operations and everything in between. All right. So there are actually two great power competitions. One is physical, and we see it, that which is seen. The other one is unseen, and our adversaries want us to believe that there's nothing here, nothing to be worried about. All the while, 24/7, 365, they are thoroughly entangling themselves into our systems to ensure connectivity, to ensure surveillance and data collection, to assure exploitation, and every day, leading to virtual colonization and social control of the very systems that run our country. And so when you transition, to, the American way of war, and again, huge fan of a new operational maneuver construct by way of multi-domain operations, because we need it. We did very well with air-land battle doctrine, updated that in the form of unified land operations, which is actually our current doctrine. But those doctrines and those concepts are theater level. It's a smaller system. It's a theater level construct, a theater level system of fighting and winning campaigns and conducting tactical maneuver at the unit level to win battles and engagement. So what we've got to create is a larger strategic maneuver system, all right, that is driven by our national industrial base, all right? And again, the grand strategy is created to create leverage throughout. We never lose leverage. We create a learning system, all right, that is more powerful than any other country or threat in the world. And that learning system allows us to make anticipatory decisions, which will enable us to win wars.
And this kind of sounds like we're going back to what we talked about earlier, problem framing, and our ability to see the problems accurately. So let me just ask you this: from a problem framing standpoint, where do you see cognitive dissonance and cognitive entrenchment in our conceptualization of modern warfare?
Yeah, so I'll just flex off and just try to answer this question by defining maneuver. So classic maneuver, physical maneuver, is fires, direct the direct approach to warfare, kinetic warfare plus movement, movement in air, land, sea, and space. I mean, physical environments. Fire plus maneuver, equals tactical direct physical maneuver, right? And the characteristics, of physical maneuver is it's visible. It builds on itself. It's very temporal, episodic. It's kinetic. It's centralized, and it produces tactical effects. It's like the last 19 years of warfare. A myriad of tactical effects will never win the strategic war. I mean, Harry Summers wrote a book about that. Okay, juxtapose that with an articulation of strategic maneuver. All right, and I'll just talk about it in terms of entanglement. So when you look at the characteristics of entanglement, the things that we are being entangled, we have technological entanglement, societal entanglement by way of religion, race, wealth, politics, economics, healthcare, governance, diplomacy, and our military is also entangled. So entanglement times exploitation at the power of 2 where we're exploiting truth, learning systems, the connectivity, the surveillance, our communication systems, how decisions are made, our ability to drive wedges and manipulate signs and symbols of our country, execute lawfare, create states of disequilibrium in the form of liminality. And again, I talked to you about the virtual colonization and social control a second ago. All of this is done non-kinetically in cyber, social media, artificial intelligence, machine learning databases drive a lot of this. We're seeing the emergence of robotics. There's going to be nanochips that are going to be put in everything that's robotic that can be surveilled by our adversaries. And of course, electronic warfare, signals intelligence, space operations, all those things, fall into those categories that can be exploited from an indirect strategic maneuver standpoint. And that's exactly what our adversaries are doing to us. The strategic characteristics is and this is the multi-reality warfare thing, is you see one fake avatar after another. The strategic maneuver concept is multiplicative. It's not additive, right? We're not talking addition here. We're talking exponential, multiplicative effects that have, exponential speed, global reach, ubiquitous. They're enduring. They cover all domains. It's very indirect. It creates systemic shock. It's very decentralized, and it produces, in some cases, life-changing, strategic effects.
And so, based on what you said about these three things: entanglement, exploitation, and indirect strategic maneuver, how do you assess the utility of existing industrial age processes and other leadership archetypes?
Yeah. So, and again, tying the problem framing theme here, I see, Dave, these archetypes collapsing all around us, these industrial age mental models. So, if you think about this from an X and Y axis chart, on the X axis, you'd have the propensity of the industrial age archetypes, right? The indices that are collapsing. On the Y axis, you'd use time, right? And, I think about it going back to 1939 to the start of World War II and kind of walking us forward, 9/11, out to what Ray Kurzweil, talks about in his book, The Singularity is Near, out to 2045, where, he postulates that we're going to have this singularity, this fusion of biological and machine intelligence, and eventually a rupture in society. But he's on to something that's really, really important. He wrote the book, 15 years ago, and we're seeing a lot of what he talked about. So, from a propensity standpoint, you look at Fortune 500 companies, back in, as an example, back in 1955, the life expectancy of a Fortune 500 company was 60 years. Today it's under 20 years. Previously, soldiers were the ones fighting physical war. Today we see civilian combatants in the form of physical terrorists, but also conducting virtual terrorism in virtual war, using virtual organizations, virtual personas, that are not tied, to any nation state. And of course, we still have nation state warfare, but warfare has evolved into the empowered individual. And with ISIS, you've seen, the attempt to create a virtual, nation. And the other thing is, heretofore we've had free speech. Now we're starting to see examples of gross censorship. But the censorship is much, much more discreet at the individual level, and it gets to the point where you don't even recognize that you're being censored on various platforms. Memes or memetic warfare is something that's also emerged to cancel people, to get them off of the virtual radar screen and eliminate their impact. And again, reconciliation is this notion of the virtual persona versus the human persona, which is more powerful. In today's world, it's the virtual persona that carries weight. So, I see process planning models, a recognition prime decision making, these bureaucratic hierarchical learning systems, power leadership, in governance models fundamentally collapsing. You also see our financial, medical, and physical infrastructure being infiltrated and exploited. All of this is taking us towards what Kurzweil talks about. His singularity, this synthesis of exponential technological change that's going to take us through this into this post-human era. And the things that I see that the adversaries are doing to us is they do have assured connectivity. They are surveilling us. They are exploiting us. And every day we're being virtually colonized and socially controlled. There is a multi-reality warfare paradigm that's emerged, all right, by way of strategic maneuver, okay? And so, it begs the question, who are the real superpowers today going forward? And again, you can't think just in terms of nation states when we try to conceptualize that today.
And so you've talked during this podcast several times about the fact that the United States enemies are employing this global entanglement and a multi-reality grand strategy. Just lay that out a little more clearly for our audience, how they're doing that and what they're doing now that's different from what we would consider to be traditional warfare.
So, and again, studying this adversary really for about the last 20 years since, 9/11, this stuff has just emerged. And again, it's really kind of exploded here in the last 15 years. But global entanglement and multi-reality warfare that employs, a strategic maneuver schema, there's really four major lines of effort, right? Controlling virtual battle space. It is the decisive terrain. Whoever controls the virtual battle space will win every war at pennies on a dollar without firing a shot. So that's line of effort number one. The virtual battle space is a real thing that has a technological structure, a set of technological capabilities, a flow of data, all right, that's uncontrolled, and a sense of time and timing that nobody can predict. As I mentioned earlier, it's pure anarchy. So we've got to conceptualize this real thing of virtual battle space that's driving everything in physical battle space. The second line of effort is controlling the perception of the truth. Our adversaries, again, through entanglement, understand our systems. They understand how we learn, how we make decisions, and how we communicate. And they've translated and twisted it into lawfare to split the seams of everything that we're doing that's meaningful in my mind. Line of effort number three is this notion of social creation, and a subset of that is cancel culture. And they do that through technological and societal entanglement. And again, expanding the box of theory, we need to explore relational dialectics theory, which is actually an original Russian theory that dates back at least a century, where adversaries come in and they drive wedges into your society, which leads to semiotic exploitation, where adversaries, not only do they drive wedges, they exploit your signs and symbols, things like the Constitution, the American flag. Somehow that all becomes bad, and they create this state of liminality, all right, this state of disequilibrium where there are no handholds. There's, people ask themselves, what's going on around here? And the fourth line of effort, and this is the summation of this, is governance, all right? And through assured connectivity, persistent surveillance, exploitation of every aspect of our life, and I've highlighted some of those things, leads to virtual colonization and global social control. All right. And they do it through entanglement and the ability to use these systems that I'm talking about to produce multi-reality warfare, multiple fake avatars of competing realities. Okay. And that's led us to this hybrid warfare construct where we're waging war in both virtual battle space and in physical battle space.
And so we're just about to the end of our time here on Leader Up, Mr. Banach. But I wanted to ask you about a theory of war that's fairly old, and it's something that I know our Leader Up audience is familiar with, and that's what's known as the Clausewitzian Trinity. And I'm going to let you lay out, describe what that is. But my question for you is that still a viable way to look at and study warfare?
Yeah. So when you look at the long-standing and revered Clausewitzian Trinity, I mean, you've got the people and the passion, hatred, primordial violence, et cetera, right? So you got the people, you have the government, reason and politics, and the military, with the subcomponents of of chance and probability. Okay, and that was a long-standing model dating back to the Napoleonic era, right? All right. Today, you have, and again, it goes back to the entanglement piece, the assured connectivity, surveillance, and exploitation, where the people, going back to multi-reality warfare, where people are seeing, they want to see the presentation of truth in its purest sense. What is truth, right? That's what people want to see in that frame. But the reality is they're being exposed to multiple fake avatars, okay, that impacts how they think about the world and how they frame and name what's going on around them. All right, that is done through the assured connectivity, the surveillance, and their exploitation of the difference between presentation of truth and the representation of truth and how we make decisions every day. All right, the connectivity, the surveillance, and the exploitation is attriting the people. It's attriting what the government can do, and right now our government is. I mean, there's several new things that are emerging that are causing governance to have to happen at a faster level. And then, from a military perspective, I mean, this is so pervasive when you think about, artificial intelligence and robotics and the things that I've talked about that have absolutely enveloped our warfighting system and requires a fundamental reframe. I mean, it causes that model that we've held to and revered for so many years to come into question. And I think it's collapsing around us as we see the order of magnitude impacts that these technological advances are having on us.
And so my final question for you, Mr. Banach, is this: what should the United States Army do? What should the United States do, and what should our Army do? How should we reimagine ourselves and our role into a different new U.S. grand strategy, and how should we relook and learn about changing the form, function, and logic of 21st century warfare?
The first thing is and again, this is not standard military thought, but we got to win the learning war. You've got to, if we're going to put a campaign out there, we've got to deny our adversary the productive range of learning, where they have the ability to learn, consult and make effective decisions. We've got to keep their elites, quote unquote, in crisis, and the population that we're, trying to influence in a state of work avoidance, where they essentially don't understand what's going on and they quit. All right, that's a big task. Heretofore we've conceded the productive range of learning because theoretically, we haven't embraced learning theory as the core element of what it is we're doing. So that'd be the first step. The second thing that we have to do is we've got to take cyber, social media, artificial intelligence, machine learning, autonomous systems, nanotechnology, space operations, and we have got to, through a design approach, iterative design, a campaign of learning and then into action, synthesize all those capabilities into our own grand strategy and strategic maneuver construct that allows us to fight a war without ever firing a shot. To be able to do that, we need to establish new operating systems. And today, we've got a outstanding process operating system that is meant for efficiencies. And again, it's really, really important. It's not a binary thing. We've got to do it. We've got to have processes. But the processes are meant to deal with technical problems. And we're dealing with complex adaptive challenges today. And these processes are collapsing under the weight of the technological challenges. So we've got to introduce new operating systems. And today it's I call it a big data operating system that has all those capabilities that I just described. So it'll be, primarily driven by artificial intelligence and machine learning. And eventually it'll evolve to quantum computing. It'll be a quantum operating system that feeds a very asynchronous design system, and the design system will feed the process system. Now, the processes that we have today in 2020 will not be the processes that we need in 2028 to be MDO capable or 2035 to be MDO ready. These processes that we're using today are collapsing all around us. So all three of these operating systems either need to be reinvented or invented from scratch here. So we need a 3 operating system construct to get our cognitive footing up underneath us to be able to fight and win the nation's wars as we go forward.
And so, Mr. Steve Banach, I want to thank you for your time for addressing our Leader Up audience with that clarion call to action for the leaders across the Army to heed these concerns that you've listed. So thank you for your time. We really do appreciate it.
Well, thank you for your time, Dave. I really enjoyed it, and you are doing incredibly important work, and so thank you.
And I want to thank my Leader Up audience out there. Thank you for listening. And this is your host, David Howie. Join us again next time for another edition of Leader Up.
As always, if you have any questions or feedback or would like to learn more about our podcast, please check the description for our email and for our website. Thanks for listening.